The day began like any other inside Clarence House, with soft footsteps of staff members moving through the halls and the quiet hum of conversations drifting from room to room. Prince Louis was visiting with his parents, Prince William and Princess Catherine, who were attending a private meeting with King Charles. Louis was supposed to wait in a nearby sitting area under the watch of a trusted staff member. He was not doing anything wrong, but like many young children, he became bored quickly. The palace felt large, still, and unfamiliar, the kind of place where every sound seemed louder and every quiet corner seemed deeper than usual. When the staff member receiving him stepped away to take a short phone call, the small moment of distraction became an open door to curiosity. Louis stood up, looked down the long corridor, and began walking slowly, one careful step at a time. He touched the walls, looked at the tall paintings, and listened to the soft sounds of the palace around him. Most doors were closed, silent and private, but one door was left slightly open, just a few inches. A soft smell drifted through the gap. It was lavender, sweet and calm, but mixed with something heavier and older that Louis did not recognize. Something about the scent made him pause. He knew he should stay where he was, but the room seemed to almost call to him. He pushed the door open a little more and stepped inside. The room was not large or grand, but it felt very personal. Silk scarves lay across a chair, candles sat half-burned on the table, and old photographs filled the shelves. It looked like someone kept their most private memories here. Louis tried not to touch anything. He only explored with his eyes, until he saw the envelope on the vanity table, held down by a heavy paperweight shaped like a horse. On the envelope, written in dark ink, was one word, Charlotte. His heart beat faster. Why was his sister's name here? Louis stared at the envelope for a long moment, frozen between fear and confusion. At first he did not touch it. He simply stood there, trying to understand why something with his sister's name would be sitting alone in this quiet room. The envelope looked old but not forgotten. Someone had placed it there carefully, making sure it stayed where it was. The strange feeling in Louis's chest grew stronger, and without fully knowing why, he reached for it. His small fingers slipped underneath the paperweight. He took the envelope, stared at the name again, and slipped it gently into his pocket. He did not open it. He did not even think about opening it. He just knew he didn't want to leave it there. A few minutes later, he walked back toward the sitting area. No one saw him return. No one noticed that something inside him had changed. When the family left Clarence House later that day, the car ride home was unusually silent. Normally Louis would talk nonstop, telling stories about the smallest things he had seen that day, flowers in the garden, someone's hat, a painting on the wall. But this time he only stared out the window, his face pressed against the glass, his fingers tugging at his sleeve. Catherine noticed immediately. Louis was never silent unless something was wrong. She asked if he was tired or hungry, but he only shook his head gently. When they reached home, he walked straight to his room without even removing his coat. Hours later, Catherine found him sitting quietly on his bed, still holding the envelope he had discovered. His eyes were wide, troubled, and unsure. When she asked softly, "Where did you find this?" Louis whispered two simple words, "Her room." Catherine did not need to ask whose room he meant. She felt a coldness settle inside her chest as she carefully opened the letter. The message inside was short, but the tone was sharp, cold, and impossible to ignore. It mentioned Charlotte in a way that made Catherine's heart drop. When Prince William read the letter that evening, his expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. He was not loud, nor angry, but deeply concerned. He asked Catherine to repeat everything Louis had described about the room. She listed the fading perfume bottles, the silk scarves, the framed photos, and the smell of lavender mixed with something older and metallic. When she mentioned a wooden box beneath the vanity table, William paused. He knew the room. He had been there once before, many years earlier. The next morning, without telling anyone, William returned to Clarence House alone. He walked through the hallways quietly, knowing exactly where to go. When he reached the familiar door, he opened it slowly. The scent inside was exactly as Lewis described, lavender with an old, almost rusty undertone that reminded him of forgotten memories. Someone had cleaned the room since Lewis's visit. The scarves were folded neatly, the candles were straightened, and the vanity table was tidied. But the feeling inside the room had not changed. It still felt heavy. Personal. Uneasy. As William walked closer to the window, his eyes caught a photograph partially hidden behind a decorative vase. It was a picture of his mother, Diana, smiling softly, as she always did in old photos. But this one was different. The glass frame had a clean crack running straight down the center, splitting through Diana's face. And across the cracked glass, written in pen, were the chilling words, "Even broken, she still takes up space." William stood completely still. The words struck him harder than the letter Lewis found. They revealed a deep bitterness, one that had lived quietly in this room for years. It was no longer about the past or the tension surrounding his mother's memory. It had now reached his children. For William, that changed everything. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. He knew what he needed to do next, and it would not be easy. 2 days later, a quiet message reached William from a long-serving housekeeper who had worked for 3 generations of the royal family. She requested a private meeting, saying only that there was something he needed to hear. William returned to Clarence's house once more, and the housekeeper led him down a smaller hallway, away from the main rooms. She opened a door to a small storage room and pointed toward a lace-covered stool. On top of it sat an old cassette player, the kind no one used anymore. She explained that it had been kept in the room William visited, hidden beneath the wooden vanity. She pressed a button and stepped back. William listened. The tape began with a soft click, followed by a familiar voice, Queen Camilla's. Her tone was not angry, but heavy and tired. It sounded like a private recording, something she never intended anyone else to hear. "They keep making space for her," Camilla said quietly. "No matter what I do, I try, I host, I smile, I endure, but I'll never be her." The next part made William's chest tighten. Camilla's voice lowered. "I see it in Charlotte. The softness. The grace. They'll adore her the way they adored Diana. And I will fade again." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed felt colder than the words themselves. William stood there for a long moment, trying to steady his thoughts. He did not deny that Camilla had faced challenges, pressure, and comparisons. But recording such thoughts, then keeping them in a private room that his young son happened to wander into, created wounds that would not heal easily. He thanked the housekeeper and left quietly. Something harmless and casual. But Lewis froze. His fork slipped from his hand, and without a word, he stood up and ran outside. Catherine followed quickly and found him behind a hedge, crying quietly with his face buried in his knees. Between soft sobs, he whispered, "I shouldn't have gone inside. I don't want her to be mean to Charlotte." Catherine's heart broke. She wrapped him in her arms and let him cry without asking for details. She understood that he was carrying something far heavier than a child his age ever should. Over the next few days, the entire household felt the change. Lewis stopped making silly jokes, the ones that usually made Charlotte giggle uncontrollably. He stopped asking questions at dinner. He walked slower, spoke softer, and often looked lost in thought. Charlotte noticed it first. She watched her younger brother with quiet concern, sensing something had upset him deeply. George also saw the difference. He stayed closer to Lewis, letting him go first during games, saving him the last cookie, and offering details in conversations so Lewis wouldn't have to answer anything uncomfortable. Catherine felt the change most strongly. Every time Lewis took her hand and held on just a second longer than usual, she knew he was still carrying the weight of what he saw. One evening, after tucking Charlotte and George into bed, she peeked into Lewis's room. He was lying awake, his hands folded on his chest and his eyes staring at the ceiling. She sat on the edge of his bed and gently brushed his hair. He whispered, "I keep thinking about the letter." Catherine felt her heart tighten. She held his small hand and stayed with him until he fell asleep. A few nights later, after the house had gone quiet, Catherine was standing in the kitchen finishing the last of the dishes. The warm glow of the overhead lights reflected on the clean countertops, and the soft smell of lemon soap lingered in the air. The steady hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then she heard soft footsteps. Louis entered the kitchen wearing his pajamas, his hair slightly messy from tossing in bed. He was not crying, but his eyes looked heavy, like he had been holding back tears for too long. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked up beside her and stood quietly, close enough to show he needed comfort. Catherine turned off the water, dried her hands, and knelt down to his height. "Hey, love," she said softly. "Can't sleep?" Louis shook his head. The silence between them was gentle, not rushed. It felt like a moment waiting for a truth to be spoken. Finally, he looked up at her with wide, worried eyes and whispered, "Will she always not like us?" The question was simple, honest, and full of fear. It wasn't anger or drama, it was a child trying to understand his place in a confusing world. Catherine felt tears gather in her eyes. She pulled Louis into her arms and held him close. She didn't answer immediately. She let him feel safe first. Then, in a calm, warm voice, she said, "What someone else feels can never change who you are. You are loved, you are kind, and nothing anyone writes or says can take that away." Louis trembled in her arms. This time when the tears came, they weren't from fear, they were from release. He had been holding so much inside, and finally letting it out made him breathe easier. A few minutes later, William entered the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. He saw his son wrapped in Catherine's arms and understood everything without a single word. He walked over and embraced both of them, forming a circle of comfort. They stayed like that for a long time, letting Louis feel the strength and safety of family. Life in their home slowly returned to its natural rhythm, but a deeper change had taken place. The morning still began with school uniforms laid out neatly, and Catherine still tucked small notes into lunchboxes. The children still played in the garden, read bedtime stories, and laughed during movie nights. But beneath those everyday routines, a new awareness lived quietly in the household. Louis became brighter again, but he was also more thoughtful. He stayed closer to his mother and father, sometimes reaching for their hands more often, sometimes sitting near them without speaking. Charlotte became his silent protector, watching him with gentle care. George continued to look out for him, finding small ways to make him feel included and comforted. William remained the steady presence that held the family together. He did not speak publicly or privately about what he found in the room or on the tape. He believed some shadows did not need more light, they just needed boundaries. One afternoon, while the children were playing outside, he stood in the doorway and watched them. Louis was laughing again, chasing bubbles Charlotte blew into the air. George cheered them on. It was a simple moment, but it reminded William why everything he did mattered. He knew his children would face challenges growing up, especially inside the royal family. But he also knew they would never face them alone. As for Clarence's house, the room Louis wandered into was quietly closed off. The items inside were removed, stored, or destroyed. No discussion followed. No confrontation. Only a quiet decision to protect the youngest members of the family. Louis never forgot what he saw, but as time passed, the heavy feeling softened. He learned an important truth, that love can protect, comfort, and guide, even when the world outside feels confusing or unkind. And in the middle of one quiet evening, sitting between his parents in the warm glow of their kitchen, he understood something even deeper, that light always finds its way through the cracks, and family is the shield that keeps it shining. When Polly took the Pepsi deal, she was already a respected celebrity. She had starred in films like Cape Fear, appeared in hit TV shows, and even earned awards for her performances. People loved her elegant, confident presence, and brands saw her as someone who could inspire trust and admiration. So when Pepsi looked for a popular figure to represent them, Polly seemed like the perfect choice. For her, the contract was not just a business opportunity, it was a chance to expand her influence, build her brand, and step into a new era of her career. At the time, celebrity endorsements were becoming more common, and companies wanted stars who looked fresh, professional, and dependable. Polly fit that image perfectly, and she was excited about the direction her life was taking. However, the entertainment industry has always been unpredictable.